Hi, everyone, and welcome back for the last presentation of the loss, grief, and bereavement. I think that, no, it's not doing that. The loss, grief, and bereavement series, where we have addressed topics that no one talks about or there remains little information of discussion in the public forum. Tonight's topic is MAiD, which is M, capital A, small I, capital D, which stands for medical assistance in dying versus suicide. But before I say more, I want you to know that this is not a one-stop-fits-all discussion on loss, death, and bereavement. As I keep saying repeatedly throughout my presentations, the subjects I present on are only a good place to start discussions on topics that are little talked about. For those who don't know me, I'm Catherine Weir, and I'm a loss, grief, and bereavement counselor. I run my own business called It Just Happens, where I offer one-on-one and group counseling workshops, a place for people who need answers, someone to talk to, someone who has been there, done that, and someone who has learned and trained skills to help the bereaved heal. So why did I choose the title of MAiD versus suicide? Well, I decided to combine these two provocative words together because for those non-supporters of medical assistance in dying, they perceive MAiD, for all intents and purpose, to be suicide. For many, taking one's life is wrong no matter how it is done. Whether it is because of one's spiritual beliefs or just a personal moral belief that suicide is unacceptable, MAiD becomes another way for the powers that be, government, people in power, are perceived as taking one's life. Suicide, as it pertains to MAiD, implies that the person is left with little support and has no choice in how they will, the sufferer will leave this mortal coil. But MAiD is a form of ending one's life. It's a well-informed, well-thought-out, and supported choice when one wants to end their suffering, physically or mentally. Suicide, and I know this is not the topic we have covered much in my talks, is a choice to end one's life without support. Suicide also comes with societal, cultural, familial, and general shame. With MAiD, this horrible aspect of suicide has been considered and addressed before anyone reaches the point of taking their life. I believe that the topic of suicide is something that needs to be discussed at length on its own, and look forward to bringing this topic to you at a later date. It'll be in the second series. But for now, it will be mentioned in connection to how the thought of suicide plays a role in one's choice to accept or deny MAiD. So tonight we're going to have three central foci of this presentation, and they are what is it? So what is MAiD? A Canadian perspective. Emotional responses, rational versus irrational, and psychological responses, reality versus implications. But first, 5 things must be noted. So we have to get the garbage out first. To begin with, I'm thrilled to announce that there will be a second series of presentations, as Susan mentioned, on loss, grief, and bereavement starting in the fall of 2023. They will remain on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. On the 4th Wednesday of every month. There are 6 planned presentations, which will run just like the first in the first series from September, October, November, January, February, and March. So they will be losing a grandchild, suicide for survivors, death in utero and at birth, loss of hope, we'll revisit MAiD again, and echo anxiety, the death of Mother Earth. And both Spirituality and Awakening I have left open 2 dates, one in April and one in May, that we can add in more topics as they come up, because they always have. That's how we got a second series, topics kept coming up. So if you have any ideas that you want to add or any suggestions, you can mention them in the Q&A at any of my presentations, or you can upload them in the chat, or you can contact me and tell me, it doesn't matter. Second, in mid-May to the end of June, that's starting May 18th, I'm offering a 6-week workshop with the title of Ourselves and Who We Are, Creating Recipe Memories for Our Grandchildren, Children, and Series. That's one of the flyers I've uploaded. This workshop has a 2-hour introductory date, which is the first May date, where I lay out all the ins and outs of the 6-week workshop. Anyone is allowed to partake in the introductory presentation and Q&A. So it's just me to present it and for you to ask questions what it's about, or how do I go about this, or anything like that. From there, anyone who wants can sign up for the 6-week workshop. So it's actually 7 weeks, but it's only a 6-week workshop. I only ask that those who want to sign up for the 6 weeks are committed. This is so we can create a community of souls who are working on the same ideas and are sharing themselves with others. So all 7 dates will occur on Thursdays from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, starting May 18th till the end of June. Okay, so I told you about the flyer. You can also contact me and ask me anything. Third, at the end of this presentation, another flyer I uploaded was the 20% off, and I mentioned that. And the fourth is in celebration in honor of my son. It's the 50% off for one day, his birthday. And those are for my for services that I offer. And you'd have to sign up and pay a deposit in order for me to offer you that discount. And finally, I would like you to note that I'm aware that this is an international forum, and the common bond that brings all participants together is the shared belief in spirituality in whatever method of comfort or delivery or discovery this means to you. For me, I do not identify as following any religious belief, but I am highly spiritual. I'm a light worker with my spiritual core made up of studies in Buddhism, Native American religions, and or indigenous religions is better, well put, and Wiccan. I believe in past lives. I believe we all have the ability to heal that which hurts by looking inward and letting love heal our pain. I believe in shared energies, deep connections between nature and living beings, and that at the core of our being, love and growth is something that we are all gifted with. We just have to learn to access and cherish the power that it gives us. So that's my introduction. So now we'll begin the talk. There will be 3 sections. The first section, what we'll start with, is the topic on what is it, as in what is MAiD, a Canadian perspective. I uploaded at the beginning of the chat a link to the Canadian government's website on MAiD. It links to so many other sites, so it's a good source and it's all credible. As we have mentioned in previous discussions in Q&A sections, there are many of you that requested this topic because MAiD is a huge topic of discussion, partly because it's new, especially to Canada. So to begin with, I'm focusing on a Canadian perspective. The legalities and movement to have MAiD as a legal viable health option has been a fairly new phenomenon here in North America. Previously, places such as Switzerland were the go-to place if one chose to end one's life through medical assistance in dying. Therefore, to start this discussion on MAiD, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of the who, what, where, when, why, and how of MAiD, according to the Canadian government website, which, as I said, I've uploaded. So how did MAiD come into law in Canada? And this is where you'll see how recent it is. In June 2016, Parliament passed federal legislation allowing eligible Canadian adults to request MAiD. This legislation was precursored by years of research and requests on the behalf of medical practitioners, support persons, and those who wanted to end their lives for valid health reasons. Then on October the 5th, 2020, Bill C-7 was introduced to amend the criminal code pertaining to MAiD, followed by it being passed into law on March 17th, 2021. On December 15th, 2022, a temporary request for a further amendment known as or Bill C-39 was put forth requesting that the definition of who was allowed to apply had the added caveat of people suffering from mental illness. This amendment was extended to March 17, 2024, so it's extended till next year, and was legally brought into effect on March 19, 2023. And my understanding is that next year it'll have to be brought before the government again because to further it from 2024. So what is MAiD? It's a legal and medical supported service for anyone choosing to end their life before a natural death. Anyone with a serious illness, disease, or disability, or who is in an advanced state of decline, or who is in a physical or mental state of suffering and sees this suffering as unacceptable, these people can ask their medical professional to apply for MAiD. So there are two types of MAiD. There's the clinical administered MAiD. So that's when the person physically can't do it for themselves. They can verbally or get across with sound mind that they want to die. And this is where it's done by someone else, like a medical professional. And then they're self-administered. So if you are of sound mind and it's all approved, you can do it. And this is what happens in the movie Mayflies. So where does it happen? Any Canadian citizen has the right to apply and must follow the pertinent laws in applying. In Canadian law, they have to apply Bill C-7 and Bill C-39, as well as any provincial or territorial requirements or non-conflicting laws must be adhered to. Who can apply? Oh, and by the way, on that Canadian website, it also gives you the links to the provinces and territories. So who can apply? Legally, it has to be 2 physicians or nurses, any combination of, are able to apply for the patient. These practitioners, when asked for their support from requesting, ask for support for the requesting patient, can legally decline this request if it does not, if they don't support it for their own personal reasons. So this does not mean that the patient cannot ask for another practitioner to help them in the support of this. It's not a fast process. So when can a person apply? An applicant must meet the following criteria before they can apply. They must be a Canadian citizen. They must be 18 or more years of age. They must have, now, this might be a tongue twister for me, a grievous, irredeemable medical condition. There must be no outside pressure or influence, and they must sign with informed consent. So why? We're just answering the question why. The realities of why MAiD needs to exist is precisely because too many whys on the part of those suffering with health conditions were not being solved. So consider these. How do you tell someone who is suffering from cancer and has seen their mother suffer terribly until her last breath, and that they too need to go through such pain and debilitation, let alone psychological torture, when a viable option to ending such a suffering is available? So if something is available, that should be available for them. How do you just say someone who suffers from a neuromuscular disease that has left them curled up in a fetal position for years? This is actually a true story. These are all true stories. While they will talk through slurred speech that only a few can make out, that the viable option of ending their life is not available. And finally, how can you visit a disabled son in a hospital bed year after year and have them beg for death because there is no legal option for them to end their lives? And if they could do it on their own, they would. These are questions that need answering. Then there is the psychological dilemma of watching one's loved ones in pain as you suffer and knowing how much they put into caring for you. For many, there is guilt For the loved one, they do not want to see their loved one gone, but they often say afterwards or throughout the end of life, I wish the pain was gone. And when that person dies, you often hear the thing of, well, at least they aren't suffering anymore. What's it say? Again, there had to be options for this dilemma. Furthermore, and I only mentioned this here, but we'll later put it later in the presentation. What about those who suicide and the shame is left for family, when MAiD could have removed this shame and brought in a psychologically healthy way of dealing with from both the perspectives of the patient and the loved one's choice to end their life. The reality is the whys of the MAiD discussion have to be answered from the patient side, the medical and support system side, and from the loved one side. It is not a short discussion, but 1 mile long, with the added reality of finding more whys along the way. As such, the question of why it is where I am going to start this discussion through Awakening Spiritually and Loss, Grief, and Bereavement here today. There are too many whys that need to be answered. So starting with emotional and psychological reactions is a good foundation for further MAiD talks, which will take place in series 2 of these presentations coming later in the year. As a precursor. Now for the next 2 parts of the presentation, I'm going to refer a lot to a movie that I saw on MAiD. And this just happened to be a fortuitous viewing. It was produced by the BBC and takes place in London, England, Scotland, and Switzerland. The movie is a 2022 production called Mayflies. And that's, Mayflies is the bug. Okay, so because I'm biased and I adore British TV, which is how I found it, and with or without the topic of MAiD, the actual movie itself is probably one of the best I've ever seen in my life. It consists of two 1-hour episodes focused on 2 best friends, Tully and Jimmy, and their partners, Anna and Iona. In the beginning of the movie, we see Tully tell Jimmy that he has terminal cancer and he wants to go to Switzerland to end his life before the illness leaves him in a state of debilitation. Jimmy, at the onset, refuses to do so, and Tully also does not tell his wife, and this creates problems throughout the movie. His wife, Anna, as we find out in the movie, is fervently against medical assisted suicide. And I use that term knowing that it's medical assisted suicide. For as she says to Tully when she finds out, why would you leave before you have to? And then when she tells him to go without her to Switzerland, she says, because I believe it's wrong. So here's a case of a woman believing that medical assistance in dying is suicide. What this does is set up, for the sake of the presentation this evening, 2 characters who stand on the sides of Tully, one on each side, a wife who will not accept his choice, and a friend who will do anything to support his friend. These are cases of the rational versus the irrational emotional responses and psychological, or the realistic and unrealistic psychological reactions to the choice amongst loved ones to accept versus deny the sufferer the right for them to make whichever choice they want to die. The movie has a 4.9 rating, 4.9 out of 5 rating, and anyone investing in the topic of MAiD should definitely see it. It is not sugar-coated nor life-lessoned by the experience of these characters. It is human nature and all the parts that go with it. At the beginning of the movie, Tully asks Jimmy the quote that he uses from the play Antony and Cleopatra from Acts 4, scene 15. Cleopatra says, in quotes, "Make death proud to take us." And again, as the story heads towards its end, this quote is mentioned again. I like this quote because I too believe MAiD helps us make death proud to take us. I will come back to this quote in the future, not only in this presentation, but down the line, because I just love it. It fits so much of what I believe in. On the topic of, so this is the next part, on the topic of emotional responses, rational versus irrational. In referencing back to previous presentations, which if you don't already know, are recorded and posted on the Awakening Spiritualese YouTube account and will soon be on my website, I'm going to take another look at emotions. Before I mentioned that there were 5 different headers of physical emotions. These are fear, anger, sadness, happiness, and excitement. That these are only header words for many, many synonyms that can be used. I also told you that physical emotions are naturally occurring unless training through whatever means helps you hide them. Some people condition themselves to not show a response, but they still have the reaction. They've just conditioned themselves to not show the response. Still, the reality is physical emotions happen to any outside stimuli, and everyone has them as they are universal. When I was coming up with the emotional responses to the topic of MAiD, I listed the following words: fear, anger, disbelief, confusion, rage, happiness, comfort, sadness, hurt, denial, to name a few. Now, if I were discussing suicide, I would have of this same list the words anger, disbelief, confusion, rage, sadness, hurt, denial, and I would add the big one, shame. If you look at the list of these 2 words, what MAiD includes is fear, happiness, and comfort in it. And yet suicide does not have these words and adds in the detrimental one of shame. I look at MAiD's word list as healthy depending on how these emotions are experienced and responded to. But still within these emotions, these healthy words can become irrational. And when you think about your emotions and how you have experienced or employed your responses to them, ask yourself, have you been rational or irrational in your responses? Let's cut back to mayflies. In the movie, Jimmy first experiences denial, then hurt and sadness. And when Tally asked him to go with him to Switzerland, Jimmy says no. Not because he does not believe in MAiD. Not because he doesn't believe in MAiD, but more because he's afraid of losing Tully. This is a good example of what a rational versus irrational responses happen when a sufferer asks for support with MAiD. Denial is rational if Jimmy does continue to listen to Tully's argument and does not agree with him when Tully talks about it, and also recognizes that it's he himself who is having a hard time letting go. Jimmy even goes so far to talk to someone who walked the same path of supporting a loved one in their MAiD choice. This is a rational thought. So Jimmy here he has not closed down. He is still in denial. He hasn't closed down. He's open to hearing more. He has sought out help from people who have experienced this, what he is going to experience, and he continues to educate himself. Now, a rational response to what can be construed as negative emotions ends up being a positive one. After all, who wants to say sadness is a good thing? But think about it. For those of us who are bereaved, it is the intense love of that loved one that has made our loss so important. It is our sadness where we find hope and love. As you will often hear, if you didn't love them as much as you do, then it wouldn't hurt so much. Even hurt and sadness has its good. Again, in the movie, Tully's wife is hell-bent on Tully not dying. Tully does not want chemo, but gives in to her wishes so she can feel better. There is a scene where Tully is getting chemo and the nurse is describing the process. All Anna wants to do is hear how Tully is going to get better and how they will have X amount of time together. At one point in the film, she is so delusional that she takes Tully's 4 weeks, he was given 4 weeks to live, and somehow construes it that if he takes chemo and does everything that the doctors say, then he'll live for another 2 years. This is nowhere, she does not get this information from anywhere. It's just what she makes up to make herself feel better. Now, what is sad about this, and I say sad as in sad, is that Anna's emotions are causing her to not only hurt herself more, but to hurt Tully, because Tully wants to leave and he plainly sees how hurt Anna is. The whole movie is about a group of loved ones who are faced with death and can and cannot deal with it. For Anna, she takes her denial, hurt, rage, anger, and refuses to accept anything other than her point. Even when she agrees to go to Switzerland with Tully, Jimmy, and Jimmy's wife, Iona, she still stands by her belief that MAiD is suicide. What is amazing about these characters is the wonderful display they show the audience on how people deal with MAiD, and opens up the discussion on a highly volatile emotional ride of bad, horrible, good, and peacefulness that occurs. So all of those things happen in this journey. So words, I imagine you never thought you'd hear together, which are bad and horrible and good and peaceful. Another emotional response I want to bring up, and let me tell you, this too is a topic in itself, is separating the sufferer's choice and their emotional experiences with those supporting or not supporting the sufferer's choice and their responding actions. Now, I want to pose another question here, and this is not meant to be judgmental or confining, but when thinking about your choice to use MAiD, so if you chose as yourself, how would you want your loved ones to respond and support you? And then we're going to flip the question asked, as yourself, and you are in a position to support your loved one, someone you love immensely, who wants to use MAiD, how would you respond rationally and irrationally? And think of this, what in those responses would you like to change or enhance in your response? So I'm going to leave this open for you to think about. Finally, I'd like to venture back to Cleopatra's quote, "Make death proud to take us." Now, for many of you, you have heard a lot of my stories around the death of my son, Mikkel, who died on March 10th, 1993 of strep throat, just shy of his 7th birthday. And when I think of all I have done that has changed me for the better, helped my children, my grandchildren, my family, my friends, coworkers, and many other people when it comes to death, grief, and bereavement, I would like to think that I honored Mikkel's death enough that the energy spirits and the creator are beaming with pride that Mikkel's death made us all proud. I would also like to think that if someone I love said, support me in the decision to MAiD, that I would smile and say yes. After all, death does not end love. It just makes it different. The final section. On the topic of psychological responses, reality versus implications. Often we hear the word psychological referring to our mind, with no pun intended, because the focus is on our brains. After all, psychology is the study of the mind, mental processes, brain functions, and behavior. So it won't be so surprising when I tell you that one's individual psychology is influenced and developed not only by our physical brain, and that's a separate discussion, but externally by our culture, the societies we grew up in and lived in or continue to live in, our family interactions, our loves, our experiences, our fears, our spiritual beliefs, and so on. As such, we cannot discuss MAiD without recognizing how important the world around us is in creating our mental processes and brain's behavior in response to the subject of MAiD or suicide. Hence my earlier suggestion that the one thing MAiD manages to exclude in the emotional experience is shame, whereas suicide is a banner for shame. And while I'm not going into shame much here, I argue that shame is at the top of the list of the few emotions that kill the human soul. There's nothing wrong with an irrational response to hearing someone wants to take their life through MAiD. And these might be here are some examples of responses. I want them to stay longer. What am I going to do without you? I can't leave. You can't leave me. Try harder. You have to stay. It's a sin. The Bible says so. It's murder, or you won't go to heaven. These are a few responses that I put in the irrational pile of let's not deal with this. But think about this. If one remains irrational, I see multiple things happening. Your brain shuts off and says, I'm not letting those things in. I'm not dealing with that. I'm not letting it in. It's not going to happen. 2, you spend your time with your loved one. The time you spend with your loved one for the time of life that they have is hampered. You become further apart, as opposed to not getting closer at a time of great need for both you and them. You miss out on the beginning of the healing process. And the stubbornness in being irrational stops one from even healing altogether after the death. And you become ill from all this psychological and emotional suffering. But if you experience what might be referred to as an irrational action after finding out your loved one has chosen MAiD, then you can always choose to educate yourself on the process and talk to other loved ones who have gone through the process to find out what you can do rationally to support your loved one's choice, in addition to help yourself heal from the grief you are about to experience and will experience post their death. In Canada, and this is on the website that I posted, there are also support groups for people who want to join a group with other like-minded support people who have chosen or are choosing MAiD. Now, when I talk about irrational responses of the brain to outside stimuli and the resulting results, I only hear the word negative come to mind. Again, being irrational is a natural response based on one's life's history. But staying in an irrational state hurts not only the person who is dying, but also yourself and those who are around you. So what is rational when it comes to the psychological experience? Basically, it is the choice to educate oneself on that which we naturally fall into irrationally. In Mayflies, Jimmy takes his irrationality and makes rational choices to educate himself on his decision. And still with his education, he still does not want to support Tully's choice to die. But a turning point occurs at a wedding when Jimmy asks Tully, "Why did you ask me?" And Tully responds, "I needed you to say it was okay." And it's at this point that Jimmy changes his mind and commits to Tully to fulfill his wishes. What is amazing about Tully's response, the response of "I needed you to say it was okay," is that it shows his own vulnerability in his choice. In his head, it is rational and logical, but in his heart, he is still a lost boy looking for approval to do something that will change all of their lives. You see, I see it this way. When someone has a physical or mental illness, disease, or disability, and they are the one living with the physical restrictions, the mental anguish, and the chronic debilitating pain, then I have a responsibility in my love for that person to do whatever I can to make their lives what they want, not what I want. It was Jimmy's life, and I would have said yes from the get-go. One's response to this request of support, whether they are asking you to be there for their last breath, or if they're asking you to support their decision, or their decision, how you respond to makes their mental journey that much more easy or hard. And as mentioned before, the same goes for you on how you respond. Now, here's a personal story. I always do these, anybody who knows me. When Mikhail lay on the gurney and they were doing CPR and taking medical measures to try and save him, I watched as his last breaths were limited, realizing that he was not breathing on his own anymore. They told me they were stopping all measures, and I asked to listen to his heart as it shut down. Now, some of you might be shocked here, but for those of you who know my story, they know that I was trained as an EMT or paramedic, as you might also call it. And I wanted to know all about my son's passing. After all, it was coming to the last I would ever see him, see his body, see him. So I took the stethoscope and listened to the last valve of his heart beat slowly, and it shut down. And then he was gone. I tell you this story because I want those who are dealing now or will in the future with the choice to be with someone who is dying or the choice to help someone in dying, that everything you choose to do in the process of the loved one's death will affect you forever. It will be on your mind daily in some way, shape, or form, and it will affect all rational and irrational thoughts and your physical and mental health going forward. Many of you have heard Catherine's sayings of what I took away from Mikhail's dying. And one of them, which occurred in the moments of me listening to Mikhail's heart, was, see if I can do this. I was the first one to hear his heartbeat. It is my responsibility to be the one to hear it beat last. And there are no regrets. So never regret what you choose to do. You will live with that forever. Okay, so in conclusion, this concludes Catherine's hypotheses, findings, and wisdom for this talk. I thank each and every one of you for showing up tonight.